Welcome back to the Meidas Defense podcast. I'm your host, Marine Corps combat veteran Joe Plenzler. Do you ever get the feeling that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are not telling us the full truth about what's going on in Iran? Late last week, we sat down with one of the nation's best investigative journalists, Julian Barnes at the New York Times, whose reporting is seriously undercutting this administration's narrative on the war. In this interview, we discuss how Trump and Hegseth's lack of strategy has created an impossible situation where the United States is either going to have to conduct a massive ground invasion to control the Strait of Hormuz or capitulate during negotiations. Julian tells us that Iran still has more than 70% of its missile capacity and are building hundreds of drones per month. We also discuss how Julian and his colleagues recently broke a story on Trump and the Israelis' plan to reinstall hardliner Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as Iran's leader, and why that plan failed. Lastly, we shift gears to take a look at Cuba and talk about how Trump's medieval siege and naval blockade is creating a brewing humanitarian crisis just 90 miles off the coast of Mar-a-Lago. Lock in, you're in for a ride.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is really hard to get the kind of granular detail that we did for previous conflicts. You know, if you think about Iraq or Afghanistan, we had reporters who were embedded inside military units on big Navy ships, afloat with Marines, right?
Yeah.
And even sometimes reporters with special operations forces.
Yeah.
This time we don't, and we don't even have reporters in the Pentagon, right? So we are trying to use new tools. Now, a difference now between years past is, open source intelligence that we have access to, that the public has access to, have exploded, right? The New York Times, we have commercial satellites that we task to take a look at stuff, right? We have crews of people who are doing their own investigations of battle damage assessment, right? So we're getting less from the military. We're doing more on our own, but there's still something lost when you're not with a unit, when you're not, out there kind of collecting the granular feel. But look, we have a takeaway from the first weeks of the Iran war, right? They hit a lot of targets. They hit more targets than they have in the past in this kind of high end, really kinetic fight.
First up in our highlights, we dive deep into the current war with Iran. The administration has been taking victory laps at the podium, touting tactical success and destroyed targets. But the intelligence community is painting a radically different and deeply alarming picture. Julian reveals how Iran just didn't survive the initial wave of U.S. airstrikes. They actually adapted within 2 weeks. We're talking about mobile missile launchers dug right back out of the dirt and an industrial base churning out hundreds of cheap drones monthly.
They were able to strike more, but it didn't have the strategic effect that they wanted, right? Iran is not at the bargaining table with a significantly different position right now. They have solidified, not weakened, their control over the Strait of Hormuz. And so those are two big setbacks for the United States. So it's very hard to say, even though the military hit so many targets, it's hard to say it was a success, right? Because, there's more, this better than I, that there's more to a military operation than just blowing up what you want, right? And the United States has learned this over and over again, right? Like, you can go and hit that insurgent. You can go and hit that, Saddam military site. But just destroying that site, just destroying that bomb maker does not push down your enemy. You need a more sophisticated strategy.
Yeah. I mean, when you go to the Marine Corps' amphibious warfare school, or now they call it the Expeditionary Warfare School, or Command and Staff College, or the National War College, I mean, they tell you it's all about breaking the enemy's will to fight, right? And what we've seen is that, there was, I think people could generously call it a strategy. I don't see any method at all, other than knee-jerk reactions of like, well, let's just blow up more stuff. But yeah, I mean, Vietnam taught us you can win every battle and lose the war. right? Afghanistan, in Iraq, we fought basically 20 one-year wars. And it took us 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban, and trillions of dollars and thousands of lives lost. Yeah, and I agree. And I think, some of your recent reporting on Iran conflicts with, it shows a pretty massive delta between the administration's public triumphalism over airstrikes and tactical success against, radar systems and missile launchers and different ships and things like that. And what the intelligence community is actually showing about the remaining stockpile of missiles. That brings us to the terrifying math of modern warfare. In this video, you're going to hear Julian break down the brutal losing equation for the United States. We are burning through $1 million Patriot interceptors to shoot down $36,000 Iranian drones. Our high-end, slow production defense industrial base simply wasn't built for this kind of mass warfare. By spooking global shipping insurers and weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has proved they don't even need a nuclear weapon to hold 20% of the world's energy hostage. The chilling conclusion, despite all our bombs, Iran is actually emerging stronger.
Sure. This has been important, and we at the Times have done a lot of reporting about it. But, they struck a lot of missile targets, and you saw at those Pentagon news conferences, they would talk about the diminishment to the stockpile of drones, to the missile sites. But in reality, the strikes, basically buried a lot of mobile missile launchers that were kind of parked in bunkers. And as soon as the ceasefire stopped, the intelligence community assessed that the U.S. had eliminated, put out of action temporarily 50% of the launchers. But within like 2 weeks, they had gone up to 60. They had access to 67% of their mobile missile launchers, right? They had dug them out, right? So rather than like hitting them while the launchers were above ground and destroying them, rather than sending in a munition that would go into the bunker and destroy it underground, they essentially just sealed things in. And it just, even under fire, the Iranians were able to dig these out.
Yeah.
And certainly once the ceasefire came, they with impunity could dig these out. The other thing is, the supply of drones, there's been a lot of estimates of how much they have left, how much they used. But the issue is they can build 200 drones a month. Like these are not sophisticated drones, but they are clever. Look, the imitation is the best form of flattery, right? Yeah. The U.S. copied the Shahed drone to make the Lucas drone. Yeah. And like, they can churn these things out, right? And, the best comparison is, it takes 36 months to make a PAC-3 interceptor.
Yeah.
And you can fire one or two to take down a $36,000 Shahed drone that, they can make in, a few hours.
Yeah.
And that's not a winning equation. That's a losing equation. And obviously there are cheaper ways to take out those drones, and many of the drones were taken out in a less expensive manner. But, the U.S. does not have those enough cheap interceptors. And like Iran may be under sanction, they may be, have deep flaws in their economy, but, they can, just like Russia, they can put out the munitions they need.
But perhaps the most jaw-dropping portion of this segment of this interview is a piece of breaking news. Julian and his colleagues just uncovered a bizarre seat-of-the-pants plot by the United States and Israel to spark an Iranian regime change by backing, get this, former hardline president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Yeah, that guy. You'll hear exactly how a gutted National Security Council bypassed the experts and how the entire plan literally fell apart because an airstrike accidentally blew up the guard shack outside of his house and injured him. You can't make this stuff up.
Sure. So, in the opening moment of the war, right, President Trump released this video, right? And that video talked a lot about regime change, right? Not something that the administration was talking about publicly, but he talked about having the Iranian people rise up. He talked about pushing out a new government. And, my colleagues, Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, have done a lot of reporting about how much the Netanyahu government was pushing this idea that they could bring regime change about. One of the mysteries, though, that we've had is who were they talking about, right? Tyler Pager and I had done some reporting about whether there were some moderates. Some people said, other people said they're not moderates. They're pragmatists, perhaps. But that there was this idea that there was an alternative out there in Iran that they could elevate. And it had always been a mystery about who they were talking about. But some people had said, well, maybe there's a Delcy Rodriguez for us. And some people had suggested that they had identified a Delcy Rodriguez, right? Another politician in the Iranian system who would be able to take control of the security apparatus, the political apparatus, and ensure a relatively stable transition. But figuring out who this was hard. And, but in recent days, my colleagues and I kind of got wind of who was under consideration. And it was the former president, the former hardline president, the former president Ahmadinejad, who is known for Holocaust denial, who is known for wanting to destroy Israel, to push them off the map. And so when I first heard about this, I was like, no way, that's insane. That's crazy. Some of the sources said that's insane and crazy, but it had a certain logic when you looked into it, right? He has become a critic of the regime. He did think the regime was too religious and not secular enough. He was basically under house arrest in Tehran. And so the more we looked into it, the more we realized that, this is why they were saying the alternatives were not moderates, right? There's nobody who's going to call Ahmadinejad a moderate. And it had a certain logic to it. On the other hand, this is exactly what you were saying about the lack of a planning process, right? In other administrations, you have plans that come up from the State Department or the Pentagon, and then they go, or maybe they come from an ally or partner, as apparently was the case here. Yeah. And then the National Security Council runs a process where something is vetted, where they test it with the military, they test it with the State Department, they test it with the intel services. But the NSC has been totally shrunk. Trump does not like process. He thinks it slows everything down. And to be sure, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, they were big on process. And sometimes it took them a long time to make a decision. And there was criticisms of whether that process improved the decision. But eliminating expertise, pushing out decision-making, you get these sort of things that come off as seat of the pants. A more expert look at Iran would point out 101 reasons why Ahmadinejad is not going to be viable candidate, why he actually couldn't do any of the things that they want. And that, why do you think an airstrike on the guard post outside his house is going to lead to him taking over? It was kind of crazy plan.
Finally, we shift gears to our own hemisphere, where Julian lays out the quiet medieval siege currently happening in Cuba. A naval blockade has cut off oil and food, creating a severe humanitarian crisis. But as history teaches us, pushing a nation to total collapse always unleashes forces we can't control, including the threat of a massive, dangerous migration of waves of people straight to Florida. It is an unfiltered expert look at the realities of modern warfare through foreign policy. Turn your volume up, lock in, and check out the best of our conversation with New York Times reporter Julian Barnes.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that they are after regime change, right? This has been, in some ways, this is long time U.S. policy across multiple of any party. John Kennedy did Bay of Pigs to try to topple the communists. But this is different, right? They have run out of oil. There is suffering on the nation of Cuba among the population. There are blackouts. There's food shortages. Like this, we have created a humanitarian crisis there, and it is in the name of putting pressure on the regime. Now, they are at an economically desperate point right now, but I do still think that this plays out over time. Like we are not in the final moves of the United States here, right? But we have reported a stepping up of surveillance flights, as did CNN, and there's talk about a military buildup. We're expecting an indictment of Raul Castro. There are things that look like the Venezuela playbook here. Now, the experts I talk to say very different situation. You're not going to be able to do what you did in Venezuela in Cuba, right? Like there's no one guy you could grab in Cuba and then make a compliant government, right? Raul Castro is not formally the leader. He is a 94-year-old man who kind of,
he's a symbol.
Yeah, he's a symbol. Yeah. He's like, he does have real power in the same way Deng Xiaoping had power over China when he was just the ping pong commissioner or whatever. Right. But if you grabbed him, there would still be a whole network of people that would rule the country, right? Yeah. So, but the economic pressure on Cuba is cutting deeply in a way that the economic pressure on Iran never did, right? By the nature of Cuba's island and in our hemisphere and their dependence on international trade. And it turns out that, the Trump administration found if you were willing to impose deep pain on average people, you can.
Yeah.
But the issue is, are you really going to force a collapse? If you force a collapse of the government, are we just going to have a ton of people jumping in boats and coming to Florida? Is that something we want? Are we going to welcome them? Or are Cubans going to start drowning? And then that's not what their relatives in Florida want. Exactly how the idea that you can put some pressure points here and then have a very precise outcome seem to be at odds with what history tells us. And so I don't think we really know what we're going to unleash here.
Thanks for joining us for this great interview with Julian Barnes. For the full interview, find us at Meidas Plus on Substack. You can follow me at Joe Plenzler on Substack and Valor Media.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.